Welcome to month 3 of Cheshire Quilter Guild 2020 Mystery Fractured Squares. This is month 3. We're going to make flying geese units. So what we need to do first of all is to take the Fabric C small squares, and we're going to draw a diagonal line across the back of each of the squares. We've got 8 of them here. And once we get these drawn, we can do the next step. Okay, now that we've got the lines drawn on the back of our small Fabric C, we're going to put 2 of those squares on opposite corners of the large Fabric E. And now we're going to sew on either side of the drawn lines, and you want to make sure that the drawn line on one of the small squares lines up with the drawn line in the other small square, so you've got a nice straight path to sew the seams on either side. Meet you back here when we've got that done. Now that I've stitched on both sides of the drawn line, I'm going to cut these apart on the drawn line. And then I'm going to take them over to press, and we're going to press toward the small triangles. Now that this is pressed, we can go on to the next step, which is to take another square and make sure the line goes from the corner of the Fabric E square out, and stitch. Now we need to stitch on either side of this. So I've stitched on either side of the drawn line, so as before, I'm going to cut apart on the drawn line, and then we're going to just press these out, and you'll see we've got the flying geese. So we'll meet you back here when I'm ready to do the next step. Okay, now we need to trim this to 2.5 by 4.5 inches. I like to start with a ruler that's got the intersecting 45s at one side, so that I can line up the 2 45 lines on the seams and trim one side of the unit. I can then use that to trim the other side at the 2.5 inches. 2.5. Oops, let me bring it up a little further so you can see. So I'm putting my 2.5 inch line. Let me turn it this way. So that nice black line is the 2.5 inch line. And that would give me one side of the unit, or 2 sides of the unit trimmed. Now to trim the other 2 sides, I want to make sure that I'm at 2 1/4. So I'm going to turn around this way so I can have that 1/4 inch line nice and square. So 2 1/4 on this side, 1, 2 1/4. I want that right at the seam line, and it should work out that the other seam comes right out at the corner. And when I turn it around, I'm just going to trim it to 2.5 by 4.5, and everything should be in its correct place. Oops. 2.5 by 4.5. Actually, if I turn it that way, that 45 line is right there on that seam, and that's a wonderful thing to help check that everything is in place. And there it is. Now we're going to have a total of 8 flying geese with this fabric configuration. So I'll finish those up, and I'll meet you back here so we can do the next set. Just as we did before, we're going to make some flying geese with different fabrics. So we're going to draw lines on the back of the small Fabric E squares. And once we have that done, we will take 2 of these squares and line them up on the corners of one of the large Fabric C squares. And so I'm going to lay this one down with the lines going so we can line them up nicely across, and stitch on either side, just like we did with the other fabric combination. I'll meet you back here when I get that done. And here we have this one sewn on, so just as before, I'm going to cut these apart, and I'm going to take them over and press. Again, we're pressing toward the small triangle. Now that it's pressed, we take a fabric E-square and put it right up to, but not quite at the corner, in just 2 or 3 threads. And now we need to stitch on either side of the drawn line. And there we go. I've got my seams stitched. Cut these apart. And now I'm going to press these back. And I'll meet you back here to trim these up. Okay, so here is, I'm going to do it again. I'll illustrate again. I'm going to put the 45 lines on my seam lines. So that's going to be the top of my goose, my nose of my goose. I turn it around and see if I can do it this way. I can put the 45 line right along that seam. And there's my 2.5 inch mark here. I can actually, having it this way, I can actually do 2 of the seams at the same time. And then when I rotate it around and I put the 2.5 and 4.5 lines on my unit, I can see my point is right at the quarter and the 2 1/4. So this is just coming out perfect. And there it is. And we're going to have a total of 20 flying geese of this fabric configuration. So this is fabric C, and these are E. So it's ECE flying geese. And that's it for this month. I'll meet you back here next month for the next installment in the Cheshire Quilters Guild 2020 Mystery Fractured Squares.